Jake Morrison stood in the center of the massive chamber and felt the weight of billions watching through his eyes. The council hall stretched out before him like a cathedral made of light and metal, and representatives from 47 different alien species sat in their designated areas looking down at him. Some had scales, some had fur, others looked like they were made of glass or smoke or things Jake had no words for. He wore his best diplomatic suit and kept his face calm, even though his heart was hammering against his ribs like it wanted to break free. For 3 months, he had been here presenting Earth's case. He had shown them recordings of human art and music. He had shared scientific discoveries and mathematical proofs. He had explained Earth's history, the good parts and the bad parts, holding nothing back because Admiral Kevin Hughes had told him that honesty was the only path forward. Kevin was watching now from the observation deck along with Commander Lisa Bennett, both of them in their dress uniforms. Both of them knowing that everything humanity had worked toward for the last 20 years came down to this single moment. The council speaker was called Jathik, and it looked like a praying mantis, the size of a horse. It raised 3 of its 6 arms, and the holographic display in the center of the room flickered to life. Numbers appeared, glowing in the air where everyone could see them. 47 votes against humanity. 0 votes in favor. Not a single species out of 47 had voted to let Earth join the galactic community. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach, but he kept his face blank. In the observation deck, Lisa Bennett's hand moved to rest on the rail in front of her, and her knuckles went white. Kevin Hughes closed his eyes for just a second, and then opened them again, his jaw tight. Jathik S. The voice came through the translation device as clicks and whistles that turned into flat, emotionless words. The council had made its decision. Humanity was too violent and too unpredictable and too dangerous to be allowed among civilized species. Furthermore, the human race was now under quarantine. No human vessel would be permitted to leave the solar system. Any ship that tried would be destroyed without warning. This quarantine would last for a minimum of 500 years. 500 years. Jake let that sink in. 500 years of being trapped in their own solar system, while the rest of the galaxy moved forward without them. He found his voice and was surprised at how steady it came out. He asked them if they understood what they were doing. Earth's sun was gradually getting hotter. In less than 200 years, the planet would become too hot for human life. They were sentencing humanity to extinction. A crystalline being that looked like it was made of living diamond spoke up. Its name was Vexener, and its voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. It said that perhaps in their final years humanity would learn the peace that had always escaped them. Perhaps extinction would teach them what diplomacy could not. Jake felt anger rise in his throat but swallowed it down. He thanked the council for their time and their consideration. He told them that humanity would remember this day. Then he turned and walked out of the chamber with his head high and his hands steady, even though everything inside him was screaming. The Horizon's Edge was humanity's first real starship. Built using technology salvaged from an alien probe that had crashed in the Arctic 2 decades ago, engineers had spent years taking it apart and figuring out how it worked. And now, Earth had a handful of ships that could travel between stars. Jake walked through its corridors, toward the bridge, and found Lisa and Kevin already there waiting for him. Lisa looked at him with tired eyes. She had been in space for most of the last 5 years, helping to build the network of satellites and stations that orbited Earth. She asked if there was any chance of an appeal. Jake shook his head. The vote was final. They had 72 hours to leave Council space and return to Earth. After that, the quarantine would be enforced by the Council's military fleet. Kevin pulled up a star chart and stared at it for a long moment. He was older than Lisa by almost 20 years and had fought in 3 different wars before becoming an admiral. He had seen humanity at its worst and somehow still believed in its best. He said they needed to contact President Helen Carter immediately. The transmission took 6 hours to reach Earth and another 6 for the response to come back. By the time Helen Carter's face appeared on the screen, the entire crew of the Horizon's Edge knew what had happened. News traveled fast, even across light-dash years. Helen Carter looked like she had aged 10 years in the time. it took to receive the message. She sat in the Situation Room beneath the White House, with General Chris Palmer standing behind her. Chris had been put in charge of the newly formed Space Defense Initiative, a military branch that officially did not exist and unofficially controlled every weapon platform Earth had. Placed in orbit over the last decade, Helen spoke directly to the camera and through it to Jake and Kevin and Lisa and everyone else listening. She said the Council had made their choice, and now humanity would make theirs. Earth had asked for partnership and been given a death sentence instead. Operation Exodus would begin immediately. If they truly had 200 years, then humanity would use every single day of those years. And if the Council tried to stop them from surviving, then the Council would. Learn what humans became when you backed them into a corner. With no way out, the transmission ended, and the UHE, Bridge of the Horizon's Edge, fell silent. Lisa finally spoke up and asked what Operation Exodus was. Neither Jake nor Kevin had heard of it before. Kevin accessed his secure files and found the folder. His eyes widened as he read. Operation Exodus was a contingency plan that had been developed in secret 5 years ago. When Earth first made contact with the Galactic Council, a plan for what to do if the Council rejected humanity. It involved colony ships and weapons platforms and mining operations throughout the solar system. It involved converting every available resource into tools for survival. Jake read over Kevin's shoulder and let out a long breath. Helen Carter was not planning to accept the Council's judgment. She was planning to defy it. And if the Council came to enforce their quarantine, they would find that humanity had spent the last 5 years preparing for war. The Horizon's Edge turned away from Council space and began the long journey home. Behind them, the glittering expanse of galactic civilization continued on without them. Ahead of them lay Earth and everything humanity would have to become to survive. What was coming? In the observation deck, Lisa stood, looking out at the stars, and wondered if the Council understood what they had just done. You could not tell a species they were going to die and expect them to go quietly. You could not take away hope and expect gratitude. The Council had voted to quarantine humanity because they feared human violence. They were about to learn the difference between fear and reality. 15 years had passed since the Council's vote, and Earth looked nothing like it did before. Dr. Amy Foster stood in the command center of Olympus Station and watched through the massive windows as construction drones worked on the hull of another colony ship. The station floated in high orbit, and from here, she could see a dozen other stations just like it, each one building vessels that would carry humanity to the stars. Whether the Council liked it or not, Amy had been a young engineer when the quarantine was announced. Now she was the director of Project Exodus and responsible for coordinating the construction of 150 colony ships. Each ship could carry 50,000 people in cryosleep, along with everything they would need to start a new civilization on whatever world they found, seeds and genetic samples and manufacturing, equipment and weapons, because the galaxy had made it clear that humanity would need to defend itself. Engineer Danny Wright walked up beside her, carrying a data pad that glowed with technical readouts. He was grinning like a kid on his birthday, and Amy knew that meant he had good news. Danny had been working on the propulsion systems for 3 years and had promised her something revolutionary. He showed her the numbers, and Amy felt her breath catch. The new drive system was ready, and it was not based on the salvaged alien technology anymore. This was purely human engineering, born from 15 years of desperate innovation. The new drives were faster and more efficient than anything the Council used. Humanity had taken the basic principles from the crashed probe and improved on them in ways the aliens had never imagined. Admiral Lisa Bennett entered the command center, and Amy noticed the gray hair at her temples. Lisa had been a commander when the quarantine started, but now she wore the stars of an admiral and commanded Earth's entire space fleet. She brought news that made Amy's good mood vanish. Council patrol ships had detected the mining operations in the Kuiper Belt. They had sent a warning. Humanity had 6 months before the Council would claim the quarantine had been violated and send ships to enforce it. Amy pulled up the defensive grid on her display and felt a grim satisfaction at what she saw. Every asteroid that humanity had hollowed out for resources had been converted into a weapons platform. Railguns and missile batteries and directed energy weapons, all hidden inside rocks that looked like natural debris to anyone who was not looking carefully. 300 autonomous defense satellites orbited Earth in layers, each one capable of independent targeting and equipped with enough firepower to cripple a Council warship. She told Lisa to let them come. The Council thought humanity had spent 15 years cowering in fear. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Captain Ryan Blake sat in the command chair of the ECS, Defiant, and watched his crew run another combat drill. The Defiant was one of 50 warships that officially did not exist. It's built in secret shipyards on the far side of the moon and in the asteroid belt. The ships were smaller than Council vessels, but faster and more maneuverable. They had been designed by people who understood that in a straight fight, humanity would lose. So humanity would not fight straight. The tactical officer was Lieutenant Sophie Miller, and she had a gift for seeing patterns in chaos. She ran the simulation again, and the AI opponents used Council fleet tactics that had been stolen from their databases by hackers who were very good at their jobs. The Defiant won the engagement, but it was close. Ryan studied the after-action report and told Sophie what he always told her. The Council had better shields and faster drives and energy weapons that could cut through human armor like paper, but the Council had been at peace for 1,000 years. They had forgotten what war really meant. Humanity had been fighting each other for their entire existence and knew every dirty trick in the book. The Council fought by rules. Humanity would fight to survive. On Mars, the red dust swirled around massive construction frames, where more colony ships were taking shape. Director Nathan Price stood on an observation platform and looked out at the shipyards that covered hundreds of square kilometers. 5 million people now lived on Mars in domed cities and underground tunnels. The planet had been transformed in just 15 years from a dead rock into humanity's second home. Nathan was in a holoconference with Earth's leadership, and his image appeared in situation rooms on 3 continents. He told them that every colony ship was designed not just to transport people, but to survive. Each vessel had hydroponics bays to grow food and genetic banks to preserve Earth's biodiversity. Each had fabrication facilities that could manufacture anything from tools to medicine to ammunition. Each had enough weapons to fight off pirates or hostile aliens or anyone else who thought humans would be easy prey. The Council's mistake had been assuming humanity would accept their judgment. They had forgotten to ask why humans had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and every other disaster their planet had thrown at them. Humanity survived because it refused to die. That was the only rule that mattered. President Helen Carter was in her second term, and her hair had gone completely gray. She stood before the cameras to address the world one final time before the Council's deadline. The speech was broadcast on every screen and every device across Earth and Mars and the orbital stations. Billions of people stopped what they were doing to listen. She told them that in 6 months, the Council would come to enforce the quarantine. Humanity would not be here when they arrived. Operation Exodus would launch in 4 months. Every colony ship would depart for pre-selected star systems far beyond Council space. Humanity was not running away. They were choosing their own path. And if the Council followed them, if the Council tried to stop them, then the Council would discover what 7 billion humans could do when you gave them no choice but to fight. The migration had already begun. Every day, thousands of people boarded shuttles that carried them to the colony ships. Families said goodbye to Earth, knowing they would never see their home planet again. Children who had been born after the quarantine had never known a time when humanity was welcome in the galaxy. They grew up learning that the universe was hostile and survival meant being stronger than everything that wanted to kill you. Amy Foster watched another colony ship detach from its construction frame and begin the slow journey to its staging position beyond Neptune. The ship was called the New Dawn, and it carried 50,000 souls in frozen sleep. Its destination was a star system 140 light-years away that orbital telescopes had identified as having 3 potentially habitable planets. The new dawn would arrive in 70 years, and its passengers would wake to a new world with a new sun. 149. More ships would follow. 7 billion people spreading out across the galaxy like seeds in the wind. Some would fail. Some would be lost. But some would survive and grow and build civilizations that the Council could never touch. Ryan. Blake took the Defiant on one final patrol of the solar system's outer edge. His sensors showed the approaching Council fleet long before they entered the system. 300 ships in perfect formation, confident and unstoppable. They had come to enforce the quarantine and remind humanity of its place. Sophie counted the enemy vessels and looked at Ryan with worry in her eyes. 300 Council ships against 50 human warships and 300 hidden weapons platforms. The odds were not good. Ryan smiled and told her that the Council was about to learn an important lesson. In war, the side with more ships does not always win. The side that wants it more wins. The side that has nothing to lose wins. The Council was here to enforce rules. Humanity was here to survive. He opened a channel to Admiral Lisa, Bennett on the Valkyrie, and reported that the enemy fleet had arrived. Lisa's voice came back calm and steady. All ships were to move to their assigned positions. Operation Mjolnir was now active. Across the solar system, every weapons platform powered up. Every hidden railgun locked onto targets. Every missile battery armed itself. Every human ship moved into position, like pieces on a chessboard. The Council fleet entered the system and found what they thought was an empty planet and a few scattered ships. They had no idea they were flying into the most elaborate trap humanity had ever constructed. Admiral Kevin Hughes watched from Mars Command and said a silent prayer for the people who were about to die. Then he gave the order to fire. Fleet Commander Kelvar sat in his command chair and watched the sensor displays with growing confusion. He was a veteran of 30 years in the Council's military and had commanded fleets in border conflicts against pirate clans and rogue colonies. He had expected to find a frightened species begging for mercy or perhaps attempting a futile defense of their homeworld. Instead, his sensors showed him something impossible. Earth was empty. The planet that should have held 7 billion humans now registered less than 1 million life signs. The orbital stations were abandoned. The lunar bases showed minimal activity. It made no sense. 300 Council warships had arrived to enforce the quarantine, and there was nobody here to quarantine. His tactical officer was a floating jellyfish creature named Qualesh, who manipulated the holographic controls with graceful tentacles. Qualesh brought up a system-wide scan, and Kelvar felt his scales prickle with unease. There were thousands of heat signatures throughout the solar system, small ones that could be ships or stations or debris. They were everywhere, and his sensors could not tell which ones were dangerous and which ones were just rocks floating in space. Kelvar ordered the fleet to hold position. While they figured out what was happening, 300 ships hung in space just beyond the orbit of the outermost planet and waited for orders. The commander opened a communication channel to demand that humanity surrender and explain where everyone had gone. Admiral Lisa Bennett sat in the command chair of the ECS Valkyrie and listened to the Council commander's demands. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the calm efficiency of people who had trained for this exact moment for 15 years. She did not bother responding to Kelvar's transmission. Instead, she opened a channel to every human ship and weapons platform in the solar system. Her voice was steady when she gave the order. All ships were to execute Plan Mjolnir. It was time to show the Council what humanity had become. Across the solar system, 300 asteroid fortresses came alive. What the Council sensors had dismissed as natural debris suddenly showed massive power signatures. Railguns that had been hidden inside hollowed-out rocks began tracking targets. Missile batteries armed themselves. Energy weapons that humanity had built by studying and improving on Council. Technology started charging. The first railgun slugs left their barrels at a significant fraction of light speed. They were just chunks of dense metal accelerated to incredible velocities, but that was enough. Physics did not care about elegant energy weapons or sophisticated shields. Enough mass moving fast enough would punch through anything. By the time the Council's sensors detected the incoming projectiles, it was already too late. The slugs tore through shields that were designed to stop energy weapons, but had never been tested against kinetic bombardment. They ripped through holes and kept going, passing completely through ships and continuing into space on the other side. Kelvar watched in horror as 12 of his ships simply came apart. Explosions bloomed in the darkness as reactors breached and atmosphere vented into vacuum. He screamed orders to scatter the fleet and return fire, but his ships were in tight formation, and it took time to spread out. Time that humanity did not give them. Sophie Miller sat at her tactical station aboard the Defiant and called out targets with machine. Captain Ryan Blake listened to her recommendations and gave firing order. The Defiant's weapons were smaller than the Council ships. Carried, but the human vessel was faster and more maneuverable. Ryan kept his ship moving in patterns that the Council's targeting systems could not predict, because the patterns were not based on logic or doctrine. They were based on instinct and chaos. The Council fleet tried to identify which rocks in the asteroid belt were threats and which were just rocks. It was impossible. Every piece of debris could be hiding weapons. Every ice chunk floating near Jupiter could suddenly light up and start shooting. The humans had turned the entire solar system into a weapon, and the Council had flown right into it. Kells finally got his fleet spread out and organized a counterattack. The Council ships had more powerful weapons and stronger shields. In a fair fight, they would win. But this was not a fair fight. The humans refused to engage in standard ship-to-ship combat. They fired from long range and then hid behind planets or dove into debris fields where the Council ships could not follow without risking collision. Ryan Blake took the Defiant through the rings of Saturn with 3 Council ships in pursuit. The enemy vessels were faster in open space, but here among the ice and rock they had to slow down. Ryan did not slow down. He trusted his pilot and his engineer in his ship. The Defiant twisted through gaps that should have been too small and emerged on the other side intact. The 3 Council ships following him were not so lucky. One clipped a large chunk of ice and spun out of control. The other 2 had to break off pursuit. Admiral Kevin Hughes commanded the Mars, defense force from a bunker deep beneath the red sand. His screen showed the battle unfolding across the entire solar system. It had been 6 hours since the first shots were fired, and the Council fleet was in chaos. They had lost over 100 ships. The survivors were trying to retreat, but humanity had studied Council tactics for 15 years and knew every standard withdrawal pattern. Every escape route the Council tried to use was covered by human weapons platforms. Every formation they attempted had already been countered in 1,000 simulations. The Council fought by the book. Humanity had burned the book and written a new one in blood and desperation. Lisa Bennett watched the tactical display and felt no joy in what she was seeing. She had not wanted this war. None of them had. But the Council had given humanity a choice between extinction and fighting back. There had really been no choice at all. She opened a channel to the surviving Council ships. 73 vessels were limping away from the solar system with damaged hulls and depleted shields. She told them to deliver a message to their Council. Humanity had asked for peace, and the Council had chosen war. Humanity had not wanted this fight, but they would finish it. If the Council came back, they would die. If they sent more fleets, they would die. The only way this ended was if the Council left, humanity alone. Kelvar listened to the human admiral's message and felt shame burn through him. He had commanded 300 ships, and barely 70 remained. His fleet had been destroyed by primitives who should not have been able to fight back. The Council had made a terrible mistake, and he had led his people into the consequences of that mistake. On the Valkyrie, Lisa received confirmation that the last transport ships were leaving Earth orbit. The million volunteers who had stayed behind to maintain the illusion of population were evacuating now that the battle was over. Project Exodus was complete. 150 colony ships carrying 7 billion humans had already spread out into unexplored space far beyond the Council's ability to track them. Lisa stood and walked to the viewport. She looked out at Earth floating in space below her. The planet looked peaceful from here. You could not see the abandoned cities or the empty highways. You could not see the homes that families had left behind. All you could see was a beautiful blue and green world that humanity would probably never return to. She spoke quietly to nobody in particular. Humanity had become ghosts. They had disappeared into the galaxy, and the council would never find all of them. Some colonies would fail and some would be lost, but enough would survive to ensure that humanity continued. The council had tried to end them, and instead had scattered them across the stars. Ryan. Blake brought the Defiant alongside the Valkyrie and docked. His crew was exhausted but alive. Sophie Miller had a cut above her eye from where she had hit her console during a hard maneuver, but she was grinning. They had survived. Against impossible odds and a vastly superior enemy, they had survived, but Ryan knew this was not over. The council would not accept this defeat quietly. They would send investigators and analysts. They would try to figure out what went wrong. They would argue and debate, and eventually they would decide to either leave humanity alone or try again. If they tried again, humanity would be ready. Every colony world was being fortified. Every ship carried weapons. Every human child was growing up learning that the universe was dangerous, and survival meant being more dangerous than everything else. The council had wanted to quarantine humanity to prevent them from spreading violence across the galaxy. Instead, they had created something far worse. They had created a species with nothing to lose and everything to prove. They had created an enemy that would never surrender and never stop growing stronger. Lisa. Bennett looked at the stars and wondered how many colony ships had already reached their destinations. How many humans were waking up on alien worlds right now? How many new civilizations were being born in systems the council did not even know existed? The vote against Earth had been meant to contain humanity. Instead, it had freed them from any obligation to follow council rules. The quarantine had been meant to keep humanity small and manageable. Instead, it had taught them to survive without help and build without permission. The council had made their choice. Now they would live with the consequences. 2. Years had passed since the Battle of Sol, and the Galactic Council was falling apart from the inside. Ambassador Jothic stood before the emergency assembly and tried to maintain order as 47 species shouted accusations at each other. The council chamber that had once been a place of dignified debate now echoed. With fear and anger, Jothic raised, all 6 arms demanding silence, and eventually, the chamber quieted enough for the ambassador to speak. 3 more colony worlds had gone silent in the past month. The pattern was always the same. Communications would cut off suddenly. Investigation teams would arrive to find the colonies completely abandoned. No bodies, no signs of violence or struggle, just empty buildings and farms with crops rotting in the fields. And always there was a message left behind in multiple languages carved into walls or displayed on computer screens. The message said that the council should have let humanity leave in peace. Council. Member Vexener pulsed with agitated colors that rippled across its crystalline surface. The being demanded action. Humanity was terrorizing the galaxy and had to be found and eliminated before they grew even stronger. Other council members agreed. The humans had become a plague spreading through council space, but one delegate asked the question that nobody wanted to answer. What fleet would they send? The council's enforcement fleet had been destroyed. Every species that had volunteered ships to hunt the humans had lost those ships. 3 attempts to locate and engage human forces had ended in disaster. The humans did not fight fair. They did not follow the accepted rules of warfare. They ambushed patrols and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They attacked supply lines and communication stations. They fought like demons, according to the survivors. Captain Ryan Blake sat in his ready room aboard the Defiant and reviewed intelligence reports with his tactical officer. Sophie Miller pulled up data on her pad and showed him the analysis. The council was fracturing. 12 species had officially withdrawn their support for the quarantine and declared neutrality. 8 more were in secret negotiations with human diplomatic teams. The truth was that humanity was not actually attacking council worlds. The abandoned colonies were not human work at all. They were council species fleeing from their own governments to seek protection with the human alliance. But every time a colony went silent, the council blamed humanity, and that fear was doing more. damage than any weapon could. Ryan had to admit it was effective psychological warfare. The Council had spent 1,000 years believing they were safe and civilized. Now they were learning that safety was an illusion. The humans had shattered that illusion, and the Council did not know how to put it back together. Sophie showed him another report that made Ryan smile. The Vrelin Collective had just agreed to provide detailed star charts for 3 uninhabited sectors of space. In exchange, they wanted technology sharing agreements and a mutual defense pact. The Vrelin were a peaceful species of traders who had no love for the Council's bureaucracy. They saw humanity as an opportunity, Ryan told Sophie to forward the agreement to Admiral Bennett with his recommendation to accept. Humanity was not just surviving anymore. They were building alliances with species that the Council had ignored or marginalized. The outcasts and the independents were finding common cause with humanity. On the colony world called New Haven, Governor Amy Foster walked through fields of purple grass under a sky that was slightly more orange than Earth's had been. The planet orbited a star 60 light-years F. Rom Earthen was home to 200,000 humans now. 3 more colony ships had arrived last month, and the settlement was expanding rapidly. The chief archaeologist was a man named Dr. Eric Lane, and he had discovered something that changed everything. He met Amy at the entrance to a cave system that his team had been exploring. Inside the caves were ruins, structures that had been built millions of years ago by a species that was long gone. Eric led Amy deep into the ruins and showed her walls covered in writing. His team had been working to translate it for weeks. The message was clear, even if some of the details were still unclear. The species that had lived here had been quarantined by the ancient version of the Galactic Council. They had been deemed too dangerous to join galactic civilization. They had been isolated, and eventually, they had left their home system. The ruins were a warning left for whoever came after them, but there was more. Eric showed Amy a chamber filled with technology that still functioned after millions of years. Computers and power sources and weapons that were far more advanced than anything the current council possessed. The ancient species had left these gifts deliberately. They wanted whoever found them to have the tools to fight back. Amy stood in that chamber and felt the weight of history pressing down on her. The council had done this before. They had quarantined other species and tried to control who could join their civilization. Those species had fought back and won and moved on to something greater. Now it was humanity's turn. Admiral Lisa Bennett arrived at Neutral Station riding a shuttle from the Valkyrie. The station was a massive wheel that spun in space far from council territory. It was operated by independent species who made their living as traders and brokers. Here you could find goods and information from across the galaxy if you knew who to ask and had something valuable to trade. Lisa had arranged a meeting with representatives from 6 different council species who were sympathetic to humanity's cause. They met in a private conference room that was swept daily for listening devices. The delegates were nervous, but determined. They represented species that had always been on the edges of council power. A delegate named Morset spoke first. His species were peaceful herbivores, whose worlds were far from the council's core territories. He told Lisa that the council leadership did not speak for everyone. Many species believed the quarantine had been wrong from the start. They wanted to help humanity, but could not do so openly without risking punishment from the council. Lisa leaned forward and told them that humanity did not need charity. What they needed was information. Fleet movements in council politics and technical specifications for council weapons and shields. Humanity was building something new out here in the dark between stars. An alliance based on mutual respect instead of fear. If council species wanted to join that alliance, they would be welcome. Morset said quietly that Lisa was building an empire. The humans were creating what the council pretended to be, but had never actually achieved. Lisa shook her head. She told him they were not building an empire. They were building a home. A place where species were judged by their actions rather than their history or their biology. If the council left them alone, then humanity would leave the council alone. But if the council came hunting for them again, they would. Learn what 7 billion angry humans could do when they worked together toward a common Goal. The meeting lasted 3 hours, and by the end Lisa had commitments for intelligence sharing from all 6 species. She also had coordinates for 12 more independent species who might be interested in joining the Human Alliance. The network was growing. Back on the Defiant, Ryan received orders to respond to a distress call. A Council science vessel was under attack by raiders from the Kresh, a hostile species that had rejected Council authority centuries ago. The Kresh were brutal and efficient. They took what they wanted and killed anyone who resisted. The science vessel was outmatched and would be destroyed within the hour. Ryan looked at Sophie and asked her opinion. The science vessel belonged to a Council species. The same Council that had tried to exterminate humanity. They could ignore the distress call, and nobody would blame them. Sophie said they should help anyway. Not because the Council deserved it, but because it was the right thing to do. Humanity did not survive by becoming monsters. They survived by being better than the people who wanted them dead. Ryan agreed. He ordered the Defiant to maximum speed toward the distress signal. The ship jumped to faster than light travel and crossed 20 light years in minutes. They dropped back into normal space right in the middle of the fight. The Kresh had for raider. Ships surrounding the Council science vessel. They were pounding it with weapons fire while the science ship's shields flickered and failed. The Kresh did not notice the Defiant until Sophie locked weapons on all 4 raider ships and fired. The human weapons were precise. They did not destroy the Kresh ships. They disabled them. Railgun slugs punched through engine compartments. Missiles took out weapon systems. Within 3 minutes, all 4 raiders were drifting in space, unable to fight or flee. The science vessel's captain sent a hesitant transmission to the Defiant. The captain was from the same species that had voted to quarantine humanity, the same species that had called humans too violent to join civilized space. The captain asked why the humans had saved them. Ryan's face appeared on the science vessel's screen. He told the captain that they helped because it was right. Humanity did not hold grudges. They remembered what had been done to them, but they did not hate. When the Council was ready to talk about peace, the humans would be waiting. The transmission ended, and the Defiant jumped away, leaving the science vessel to make repairs. Ryan knew the captain would report what happened. Word would spread through the Council. The humans had saved a Council ship when they could have let it die. That single act would do more to change minds than 100 battles. Lisa received the report from Ryan and allowed herself a small smile. The Council had believed humans were violent and unpredictable. They were learning that humans were capable of mercy. That made humanity more dangerous than any weapon because it meant they could not be easily understood or predicted. The galaxy was changing. The Council's power was fading. New alliances were forming, and at the center of it all was humanity, proving every day that they deserved their place among the stars. 5 years had passed since humanity left Earth, and the galaxy was not the same place it had been. Admiral Lisa Bennett stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie as the ship entered orbit around Terra Nova. The planet was beautiful in a way that made her heart ache with memories of home. Blue oceans covered most of the surface, and green continents dotted with mountain ranges rose from the water. This world had become the capital of the human alliance and represented everything humanity had built in just 5 short years. 47. Human colony worlds were thriving across unexplored space. Some were desert planets where people lived in underground cities. Some were ocean worlds where floating settlements rode the waves. Some were frozen moons warmed by human technology. Each one was different, but all of them were home to people who had been told they had no future. The Council had tried to contain humanity, and instead had scattered them like seeds across the galaxy. The Human Alliance was more than just humans now. 18 independent species had joined the Alliance as full members with equal voting rights. These were species that the Council had ignored or marginalized for centuries. Traders and explorers and peaceful farmers who wanted no part of the Council's rigid hierarchy. They had found common cause with humanity, and together they were building something new. President Nathan Price stood at the podium in the new assembly hall and looked out at the representatives of 30 different species. He had been the director of Mars operations during the Exodus, but now he was the elected leader of the entire alliance. His hair had gone gray, and lines creased his face, but his voice was still strong. He told the assembly that humanity had been cast out because the council deemed them too dangerous and too violent and too young. But the last 5 years had proven something important. Survival demanded strength, but strength did not have to mean conquest. Every species in the Alliance was here by choice. Every world they had settled was uninhabited, or given freely by species who welcomed human neighbors. Humanity had fought when attacked, but had never started a war. They had defended themselves, but had not sought revenge. Former council member Morset stood to speak next. He had abandoned his position in the council to join the Human Alliance, and now served as ambassador to the independent species. His people had been farmers on the edge of council space and had always felt like outsiders. He told the assembly that the Galactic Council claimed to represent civilization but had become stagnant and afraid of change. The council punished innovation and rewarded conformity. The Human Alliance represented something different: growth and adaptation and hope for the future. On the frontier, Captain Ryan Blake received a distress call while the Defiant was on patrol. A council science vessel was under attack by Kresh raiders again. The Kresh had been getting bolder lately, raiding council shipping lanes and attacking isolated outposts. The council's weakened military could not protect everyone. Ryan looked at Sophie Miller, and she nodded before he even asked. They had saved a council ship 2 years ago, and word had spread. Some council species now quietly hoped that human ships would be nearby when trouble started. It was not an official arrangement, but it was becoming common enough that Ryan suspected some council captains were deliberately traveling near human space. The Defiant jumped to the coordinates and found 3 Kresh ships attacking a council vessel that was already badly damaged. Ryan gave orders and Sophie coordinated the attack. The Defiant's weapons disabled the Kresh ships within minutes. Railgun slugs took out engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. The raiders were left drifting but alive. The council ship's captain sent a transmission, and Ryan recognized the species. They were the same crystalline beings that had called for human extinction 5 years ago. The same species whose representative Vexener had said that extinction would teach humanity peace. The captain's voice was quiet and ashamed. He asked why the humans had saved them when his people had voted to quarantine. Earth. Why show mercy to those who had shown none? Ryan's face appeared on the screen, and he spoke carefully. He said that humanity saved them because it was the right thing to do. The council had judged humans by their history of violence and war. Humanity could judge the council by that same standard and find them wanting. But that would make humans no better than the council. Humanity did not hold grudges, even though they remembered everything. When the council was ready to talk, as equals the humans would be waiting. The transmission ended, and the Defiant jumped away. Ryan knew this rescue would be reported just like all the others. The council was learning that humanity could be dangerous, but also could be kind. That made them harder to predict and harder to fight. Back in council space, Ambassador Jothik faced a nearly empty chamber. Half the council seats were vacant now. Species had withdrawn or joined the Human Alliance, or simply declared neutrality and stopped attending sessions. The council's power was crumbling, and everyone knew it. Jothik made the announcement that many had been dreading. The council needed to make peace with humanity. The vote 5 years ago had been intended to contain a dangerous species. Instead, it had freed them from any obligation to follow council rules. Humanity had built in 5 years what took the council 1,000 years. They had created thriving colonies and formed alliances and earned respect through action rather than demanding it. Through authority, the council had been wrong. Jothik said those words and felt them burn. The council had been wrong to judge humanity so harshly. Wrong to believe that quarantine would solve anything. Wrong to think that violence in the past meant violence in the future. The humans had proven themselves in the hardest way possible by surviving when everything was against them. The few remaining council members voted unanimously to request formal peace talks with the Human Alliance. It was an acknowledgement of failure, but also a necessary step towards survival. The council needed the Alliance more than the Alliance needed the Council. On Earth, Admiral Kevin Hughes walked through the ruins of New York City and watched construction drones rebuild what had been abandoned 5 years ago. Earth was being restored slowly using technology that had been shared by Alliance partners. The planet would never hold 7 billion people again, but it would be home to those who chose to return. A young engineer worked beside Kevin, running diagnostics on a fabrication unit. She had been born on Mars and had never seen Earth until now. She asked Kevin why humanity was rebuilding when everyone had already moved to other worlds. Kevin looked at the sky where stars were just becoming visible in the evening light. He told her that Earth would be a monument, a reminder of where humanity came from and why they left. Future generations would visit and learn about the Council's vote and humanity's response. They would understand that survival sometimes meant leaving everything behind and starting over. A transmission arrived from Terra Nova and Lisa. Bennett's face appeared on Kevin's communicator. She told him that the Council had requested formal peace talks. They wanted to negotiate a treaty and end the hostility between the Council and the Alliance. Kevin smiled and told her to accept the request, but to make sure the Council understood the terms. Humanity was not asking to join the Council anymore. If the Council wanted peace with the Human Alliance, they would negotiate as equals or not at all. The humans were not supplicants begging for acceptance. They were a power in their own right and would be treated as such. Lisa agreed and closed the transmission. She stood in the observation deck of the Valkyrie and looked down at Terra Nova. Cities glowed on the night side of the planet. Orbital stations sparkled in the sunlight. Ships moved between worlds carrying people and goods and ideas. This was what humanity had built when given no choice but to build or die. The peace talks would happen in 3 months at Neutral Station. Representatives from both the Council and the Alliance would meet to negotiate terms. It would not be easy. There was too much history and too much pain. But it was necessary. Ryan Blake brought the Defiant home to Terra Nova after 3 months on patrol. His crew was tired but satisfied. They had stopped 2 more crash raids and escorted 4 colony ships to their destinations. Sophie Miller had been promoted to commander and would be taking command of her own ship soon. Ryan would miss her tactical genius, but she deserved the promotion. As the Defiant descended toward the main spaceport, Ryan looked at the planet below and thought about how far humanity had come. 5 years ago, they had been refugees fleeing a dying world. Now they were building a civilization that spanned dozens of star systems. The Council had tried to end humanity's journey to the stars and had failed completely. The galaxy. Council had voted against Earth, believing it would be their solution to a dangerous species. Instead, it had been their final mistake. Humanity had proven that you could not kill hope by voting against it. You could not stop a species that refused to stop. You could not contain people who were willing to do whatever it took to survive. Terra Nova's sun set behind the mountains, and the stars came out one by one. Each star represented possibility. Each one could be home to a human colony or an alien species looking for partners or unexplored worlds waiting to be discovered. The galaxy was vast, and humanity was just beginning to explore it. Admiral Lisa Bennett sent the final message to the Council confirming the peace talks. She included a statement that would be read into the official record. Humanity had asked for partnership and been given exile. They had asked for a chance and been given a death sentence. But they had survived and thrived and built something beautiful out of desperation. The Council could learn from that, or they could continue to decline. The choice was theirs. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was leading that change. Not through conquest, but through example. Not through violence, but through determination. The Council's vote had been meant to end humanity's story. Instead, it had just been the beginning.